it's my understanding that we want further information in regards to the history of our office. So we shall start. We go back, basically our start goes back to 1848. And in 1848, the United States Congress and Mexico signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And in that treaty, the United States acquired what is now California, Nevada, and Utah. And when they did that, the area that's now California was under the direction of a General Bennett Riley. And the capital, as such, of our territory was in Monterey. And so they got the idea that they would develop the territory, and things were going along very well. General Riley appointed in 1848 and 49 3 individuals who were appointed alcaldes and later known as sheriffs. They were not elected. They were appointed to maintain law and order in our territory here. However, in January of 1849, John Marshall discovered gold up in Coloma, and the gold rush hit us. And that brought a large number of people to California in a very short period of time. And so Congress decided to, instructed General Riley to start elections so that we could establish our state. And so in in the February of 1849, the General Riley was instructed to establish state boundaries, within the state counties, and within the counties cities, and so forth, to start preparing for local government. And there would have to be elections and so forth. And sure enough, in April of 1849, elections took place. For us here in San Joaquin County, that happened in Stockton. And the county contingency, it took a couple of meetings to try and get organized, and then they called for individuals to run for the various offices. Well, all the offices were filled except for one. And that was the office of sheriff, because there were individuals that were there felt that they didn't want to have to be responsible for law enforcement in a community that was having difficulty with all the disgruntled miners that were coming back that didn't make their fortune. And it was kind of a bad situation in our area. So anyway, they had to call for a second meeting to get someone to run. And finally, a physician by the name of Porter Ash put up his hand and said, I'll run for office. I will be happy to do that as long as I can, get some assistance. If someone will run against me, I would appoint them undersheriff. If I win, they'd be undersheriff. If they win, I will be under. If somehow we'll make it work. And here we start in with the positive thinking. And sure enough, Sheriff Porter Ash was elected, and keeping in mind he was a physician that had, according to the newspapers, 58 full-time patients. Our first sheriff's office was his medical office. His apothecary in the back was moved to a different location. Blacksmith came in, put bars on the windows and made a solid door. And in one office on Main Street in Stockton, the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office got its beginning. The only way that Sheriff Ash could enforce the law was assistance through the various townships that were established in the county. And there were 9 of them that were established. Nowadays, it would be this like the city of Ripon had one, Lodi had one, Linden, and they had a justice of the peace in each town, each township, and a constable in each township that was under the direction of the justice. And the sheriff could deputize the constable, and therefore you established a resident deputy that could handle local things that, because the response time from Stockton was, anywhere from half a day to 2 days for the sheriff or undersheriff to get out there, and so the constables would have to handle it and then report to the sheriff. So the system worked for a while. And I think that it's a good example of how, under all kinds of negative issues that were going on, if you take a positive approach to things, law enforcement prevailed, the preservation of law and order as best they could. And there are certain incidents where you would have a committee of vigilance when you had issues that were kind of getting out of hand, that would come and help the sheriff, not be in odds with him, but would come and help and try and settle issues that that had come up. But it was a very difficult job. Nowadays it would be almost impossible, but they made it work, and I think as time went on, I'll get into some of the details of what made it work for the sheriff, and they did some very innovative things.
What were some of the innovative things that they did?
Well, one, you have to have some type of holding facility for prisoners, and the sheriff was very sorry about it, but that little room in the back of his office did not work, and there were other buildings that did not work. But there was a ship in the deep water channel that had been abandoned by the miners that had come up, the prospective miners, and it was called the Susanna. And they thought, well, maybe it'd be a good idea that if they could rent the ship, I assume the owner was around and available. They did. They rented the ship. Blacksmith came and put bars on the portholes and the forecastle going down into the ship. And lo and behold, why, they got it to work, and prisoners were put down into the side of the ship to be held for court, which brings up the second thing. There was no court. I mean, what are we going to do there? And we had a couple of individuals that were elected judges, but there was no courthouse. So they were to deal with a saloon downtown Stockton, and the judge had an office above the saloon. There were rooms up there, and downstairs, the agreement was that from 8 in the morning until noon, they would hold court. The judge would usually be, according to the reporters of the time, would be right there sitting on a bench behind the bar, and all of those involved out on the floor while they conducted court. But everything had to be done by noon. And then at noontime, it turned back into a bar, and from noon on until the next morning, why it worked. How did that did it work for the community and everything? And the answer is yes, it did. Yeah. So they then finally got the judicial end of this thing halfway worked out, where they had location, and they were able to hold the prisoners at the length of time. The prisoners that were there on very serious charges, they needed to have come up with some idea of punishment or whatever was going to take place. There was a great difference of opinion about serious crimes and so forth. The final decision was to put a whipping post out in front of the ship on the deep water channel there, and it had a place for shackles and everything. And depending upon the severity of the crime, that determined the number of lashes with the whip. And at the same time, to try and maybe curb this lawless, this type of lawless activity, the public was invited and could watch. And sure enough, after a while, after a few whippings and the realizing that this was serious stuff, the crime rate did go down. It was certainly a different way of doing things. Did it work at the time? Yes, it did. Did it completely stop it? No. And finally, we had a homicide, a stabbing, and so they then decided that there was a tree that would be appropriate for a gallows or hanging somebody, and so the first hanging in Stockton was off of just close to where the ship is, from a tree, and again they decided that they would make a lesson out of this thing, and so they scheduled the execution for on a Sunday, but it had to be after church. And then after church, everybody adjourned to where the execution took place, and the Women's Benevolent Protective Society of Stockton cooked a meal, and believe it or not, and so they had food there, and finally at I don't know, it was 3 or 4 o'clock, the execution took place, and the Reverend at the time said his piece, and then the undersheriff had a long speech about this. You carried on this type of activity, this is what's going to happen, and utilize the experience. So a little different a way of doing things as from today, of course, but at the time it was a sincere effort to try and bring things to a peaceful existence in the town. And Stockton had its difficult times during this, mainly because of the miners coming back that were not successful in making their fortune. So they took out their frustrations on the community they came back to. Their ships or boats or whatever were then, of course, done away with here. So they had no place to go. So they had a hard time, and the sheriffs of the 1850s had short terms because it was very difficult, and after 2 or 3 years of doing it, why, they decided that maybe somebody else will take over. So that's basically how things got started.